If you're a blue collar guy and you're in the trades, then chances are you probably own a truck. And if you own a truck, then you're probably throwing stuff in the back of it all the time. One of the most annoying things is if you keep throwing stuff in the back of your truck and one day you accidentally break a back window. Now, there's a couple of things you could do about this. You could just replace the window and keep throwing stuff in the back of your truck and hope and pray that you don't break another window, or you could put a headache rack on it. A headache rack is not a rack that gives you a headache. In fact, the goal of a headache rack is to do the opposite of that, is to keep you from getting a headache. Now, I'm not sure how well this works because every truck I get, I put a headache rack on it, and yet I still manage to get headaches. All joking aside though, these headache racks do quite a good job at protecting your cab. Whether that's from throwing materials or tools in the back of your truck and shattering it, or in the worst case, if you roll your truck, this would help protect the structure of the cab and could potentially save your life. What I'm doing is essentially just tracing the shape of my cab, and I'm using a 2x4 there to get a straight line because the cabs on these trucks are not actually straight. And what this means is that after I draw that line in, I need to make sure I account for the thickness of the 2x4. So after I make this initial line, I'm taking 1.5 inches off of that, and then that will actually follow my cab pretty closely. Now, normally when I build these racks, I use a computer to draw it up because that just saves me so much time and effort. But for the sake of this video, I wanted to show how you could do this with the tools that you've already got. And if you don't know how to use a computer, well, it's the 21st century, so you should probably learn. But if you're a complete computer dummy, then this will work great for you. After a little bit of adjustment on this template, I was able to get the height and the width to where it follows the exact profile of my cab. For those of you who don't know, building these headache racks is actually what got me my start in business. Because I used to travel around the world doing specialized masonry with a friend of mine, but one day I picked up my dad's old welder and I just got hooked. The first headache rack I built was absolutely terrible, and that's to be expected. Because how do you get good at something without spending many hours doing it? So the angle on the bottom of this headache rack is 65 degrees. And so this angle is going to be our key angle for the rest of this project. And if we don't have that right, nothing else is going to be right either. I did my first welding project about 4 years ago, and ever since then, starting my business, learning about fabrication, it has been such a fun process and a very painful process also, because anytime you're learning a new skill, you're not going to get it overnight, and you're going to first make a lot of mistakes before you get it right. And even when you do get it right, you're never going to get it 100% right, because you're always going to make mistakes. And speaking of mistakes, I just made a mistake on this project. Because I'm not used to building headache racks with a template like this, I accidentally cut this material to the wrong side of the cut. But thankfully, I've got some extra material, so I'll just go ahead and recut this. I used to build a lot of these headache racks, and that's for a couple of reasons. For one, when I started my business, this is what was in demand. And for another thing, this is really all I knew how to build, so that was just what I built. However, now I've transitioned to building a lot more handrails and gates. And that's one thing that I've learned running a business for 3 years now, is different things are going to be in demand at different times. And so you can't necessarily build a business on just one thing and expect to be building that thing for the rest of your life. Another reason I believe that headache racks are just not as much in demand now is they're not as much of a necessity as handrails are. Almost everybody has front steps, sidewalk, or ramp at their house. I would imagine there are a lot fewer people who own trucks as opposed to those who own cars. Now, I did my best to get the angles on these tubes exactly what they should be. However, I have yet to find a solution that makes absolutely perfect cuts unless you mark it out on the material and then use a hand grinder to cut it. And the fact that the cuts are not perfect means that there are some gaps that I'm going to have to fill. But if you've got a MIG welder, that's not going to be a problem. But one thing that really helps if you're doing joints like this is to make a few tacks in between where you're going to weld. And then if you weld it, you won't burn through as easily. Now it's time to work on the angle irons for the mounting plates. In this case, I'm cutting each one of these to 15 inches. Where the front of this headache rack sits, we actually need an angle iron to make this headache rack so it will actually slide all the way forward. So what I like to do is I take my bandsaw and I make a notch. In this case, it's 1.5 inches. In some cases, that distance is 2 or 3 inches. And when you cut these, make sure you cut them mirror image. Because here I cut 2 of the same and then I test fit it on there and it was backwards. Now, I guess I wasn't thinking here, but I started putting these 5x3 angle irons on there and realized that they were actually too narrow, so I had to swap those out for some 6x3 angles instead. I can't say that I'm really disappointed that I don't build a lot of headache racks anymore because the profit on headache racks is just not that great. There's really only a certain amount you can charge for a headache rack because people will only pay a certain amount. These racks are generally between $800 and $1,500 depending on how complex you want it. But after I figure in how much time they really take me and what the powder coat and material costs, I'm not making a lot of money on them. However, for handrails and gates, I charge by the hour, so I actually make pretty good money on handrails and gates. And that's one thing that we have to learn as business owners is what is actually in demand. What do people need, and what do people just want? So whatever niche you're in, figure out what's in demand, and then make that thing. I've talked to multiple people with different types of businesses recently, and what I found out is that the non-essential businesses are struggling right now. If you're selling something that's a luxury, and people don't actually need, then it seems to be that that thing is not actually selling as much as it used to because of the way our economy is right now. And at this point, it's time to figure out where that third brake light is going to go. So what I do for that is measure that distance between the mounting angle irons, and I find the center, and then whatever the width of that third brake light is, I'll center that on that line. In this case, it was 14 inches. I believe one of the most confusing things about building a headache rack or a handrail, or really almost any kind of metal fabrication, is angles. Angles are so confusing, and when I first started my business, I tried to calculate all these angles manually, and I failed miserably. And one of the tools that really helps me on a daily basis with this is Sketchup. No, this is not a sponsored video, but I just want to take a moment to tell you about Sketchup. I use Sketchup on almost every single project, and it makes my job so much easier because now, instead of having to calculate every angle manually, I just put the dimensions in there and SketchUp does that for me. And this is a free program. You can use it online. You don't even have to download a desktop version. In fact, I believe they also make this for iPhones and iPads. So you don't even have to have a desktop computer to use this, although it does make it a lot easier if you do. I'll leave a link to their website below, so go check them out. Now, after you get this frame done, then it's time for you to be creative and figure out what you want to put in there, because this part is really up to you. In this case, I wanted something really basic because in my F-150, the visibility is already not that great, and I don't want to make it even harder to see out the back window. So in this case, I'm just going with 1.5 inch expanded metal. My method of putting that in is just really simple. You just put the headache rack right on top of the mesh, then you simply mark with a paint pen or a Sharpie all the way around that frame, and then you cut it with a hand grinder. And when I weld this mesh in there, I don't measure it out. I probably should, but I just kind of eyeball what looks to be in the center of the tube and then get it all welded up. Now, one thing that really sets apart non-professional fabricators from more professional fabricators and separates people who do a really good job and just kind of do a sloppy job is how you clean up everything when you're done welding. Because fabrication is not just welding. If you're a metal fabricator, you know there's a whole lot more to it than just the welding. So once you're finished welding, if your welds don't already look good, then clean them up to make them look presentable. And if you take a little bit of extra time to make sure everything is cleaned up really nicely, that's going to set you apart from the other guy who's doing kind of a sloppy job. And so another thing you want to do is anytime you cut a piece of metal and there's a raw edge to it, make sure you take a flap disc and deburr it, because if you don't, that's really a hazard. And if anybody put their finger on that metal, it's so sharp and they would probably get a cut off of it. Now, the last step in this build was to drill the mounting holes. Since I had my truck right outside the shop, I just drilled them before I got it powder coated, but a lot of times, if I don't have the truck with me, I'll just wait until it's powder coated and then drill the holes. Now, before I was able to get this rack installed, I actually had to cut out a little section of this bed liner because when I put the rack in there before, I tried to push this rack forward and it just wouldn't go. So this seems to be a common problem, in particular with these F-150s. I've done a couple of them in the past, and it seems to be that there's that little piece of bed liner that's just kind of right in the way. After that, it was time to go pick this up from powder coat and get it installed. And that went fairly straightforward. All I had to do is drill those holes through the bed rails, and thankfully the holes in the rack were already in the right spot. And on these F-150s, there's just not a lot of room to work with to mount these bolts. So you got maybe an inch in there to work with, and that's about it. So you got to put it just in that right spot. And while I was doing this, I accidentally dropped one of those nuts down behind the bed liner, so I had to pick another one of those up from the hardware store. And in the end, the rack came out pretty well. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I really appreciate you if you made it this far. And if you did, hit that like button. And if you'd like to see more like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. That will really help YouTube push out my videos so that other people can see content like this. And also, if you did enjoy this video, I think you would also really enjoy this video here, how to build a headache rack with the tonneau cover. And one more thing. I'm considering creating a course, basically all the information that I know about building headache racks all in one video to save you some of the headaches that I went through. If that would be something that you guys would be interested in, please let me know and I will come up with a course. And until next time, God bless.